The stars looked different tonight. Zara Katal stood at the observation deck of the Altarian Central Command, her four-fingered hands pressed against the clear barrier. Something was wrong. The scanner systems had detected unusual movement patterns among the distant stars 3 days ago. Now the Altarian scientists were certain. It was the Vordak Armada. Zara shivered despite the regulated temperature. Everyone in the galaxy knew about the Vordak. They moved from system to system, stripping planets of resources and leaving nothing behind. No negotiations, no mercy, just destruction. Ambassador Katal, the Council requests your presence, said a voice behind her. Zara turned to see her assistant, his skin glowing with the pale blue light all Altarians shared when they were stressed. They've confirmed it then. He nodded without speaking. The walk to the council chamber felt longer than usual. Altaria had been peaceful for generations. Their people were known throughout the galaxy as diplomats, scientists, and artists, not warriors. They had always relied on the protection of the Galactic Coalition. Inside the chamber, the 7 council members sat in a half-circle. Their skin glowed the same stressed blue as her assistant's. High Counselor Joran nodded for her to take a seat. Ambassador Katal, we need your expertise with the Coalition. The Vordak fleet will reach our outer colonies in 14 days, and our homeworld in 30. We have already sent formal requests for Coalition defense forces, Joran said, his voice steadied despite his glowing skin. What was their response? Zara asked, though she already suspected the answer. Counselor Tellen slid a data tablet toward her. See for yourself. The message was short. The Coalition acknowledged the threat, but deemed it too significant to risk their main fleet. They offered strategic advice and diplomatic channels, instead of ships or weapons. They're abandoning us, Zara whispered. They suggest evacuation of key personnel, Tellen added bitterly. Apparently our world isn't worth saving. Zara's mind raced. 2 billion Altarians lived on the homeworld, countless more on the colonies. Evacuation was impossible on such a scale. There must be someone else we can turn to, she said. An uncomfortable silence filled the room. Finally, Joran spoke. The Coalition has forbidden us from seeking help outside approved channels. They fear escalation. Zara stood up suddenly. Escalation. The Vordak will destroy our entire civilization. We understand your frustration, Ambassador, Joran said, but we have no alternatives. The Coalition controls all significant military forces in this sector. But that wasn't entirely true. Zara remembered a diplomatic function 6 months ago. She had met representatives from a species recently discovered by the Coalition, humans from Earth. The Coalition representatives had kept them at arm's length, calling them unpredictable and too aggressive for proper galactic society. Zara had spoken with a human woman named Susan Harper, a commander in their defense fleet. Commander Harper had been interested in Altarian culture, asking thoughtful questions while the Coalition representatives dismissed the humans as primitives. There is one possibility, Zara said carefully. Earth. The council members exchanged looks. The humans? Tellen asked. They barely have interstellar capabilities. The Coalition has classified them as a developing species. I've met them, Zara insisted. They're more capable than the Coalition admits, and they're not bound by Coalition politics. The Coalition explicitly forbids contact with Earth without supervision, Joran reminded her. And what do we have to lose? Zara countered. If the Vordak come, and we do nothing, we all die anyway. After hours of debate, no decision was reached. That night, Zara sat alone in her communications room. She was breaking dozens of Coalition protocols and probably ending her diplomatic career. But she thought of the billions of Altarian lives at stake. She entered the coordinates for Earth, a system the Coalition considered backwater and primitive. Her fingers hovered over the transmit button for just a moment before she sent the message. To Earth Defense Command. This is Ambassador Zarek Tall of Altaria. Our world faces extinction. The Galactic Coalition has abandoned us. Please help. Zora closed her eyes as the message traveled across the stars. Now all she could do was wait and hope. Commander Susan Harper was finishing her morning coffee when the alert came through. She had been in the middle of reviewing training exercises for her crew aboard the U.S. Defender, one of Earth's newest space vessels. The ship wasn't as large or advanced as those belonging to the Galactic Coalition species, but humans had packed it with their best technology. "Commander, we're receiving an unusual transmission," said Communications Officer Sam Bennett. His voice held a note of surprise. "It's coming from outside Coalition-approved channels." Susan raised an eyebrow. "Put it through to my station." The message was brief but clear. An alien race called the Eltarians was facing destruction. Susan remembered meeting an Eltarian diplomat at a function several months ago, a female named Zora. She had seemed intelligent and curious, not at all like the superior attitude many Coalition representatives showed toward humans. "How far is Eltaria from our position?" Susan asked. "About 4 days at maximum speed," Officer Bennett replied. "But Commander, Coalition protocols strictly forbid us from interfering in non-human conflicts without approval." Susan nodded slowly. The Coalition had reluctantly welcomed Earth into their community of worlds 2 years ago, but only as junior members with limited rights. Humans were constantly reminded they were too unpredictable, too emotional, and too violent for full membership. "Get me Admiral Carter," she said finally. Within minutes, the weathered face of Admiral William Carter appeared on her screen. Susan forwarded the distress message and waited as he read it. "This puts us in a difficult position, Commander," the Admiral said. "The Coalition representatives were very clear yesterday. All non-Coalition requests must go through proper channels." "With respect, sir, it sounds like they already tried the proper channels," Susan replied. "The Coalition abandoned them." Admiral Carter's expression remained neutral, but Susan saw a flicker of something in his eyes. Anger, perhaps. "The Coalition ships are more advanced than ours," he said carefully. "If they deemed the threat too significant to engage, what chance would we have?" "Permission to speak freely, sir." The Admiral nodded. "The Coalition thinks we're violent primitives. Maybe they're right about the primitive part. Our ships are newer and less advanced. But maybe that's exactly what these Eltarians need right now." A long silence stretched between them. Finally, Admiral Carter leaned forward. "Officially, Commander Harper, your request to investigate this transmission is denied. Earth cannot risk our standing with the Coalition." His voice was firm, but then he continued more softly. "However, your scheduled training exercises near the outer system border could experience a navigation error. Such errors happen sometimes with our primitive technology." Susan understood immediately. "Yes, sir. Our navigation systems can be unreliable." If such an error occurred, the Admiral continued, "I wouldn't expect to hear from the U.S. Defender for at least 2 weeks. By then, perhaps the situation will have resolved itself." "Understood, sir." "One more thing, Commander," Admiral Carter added. "If you are discovered, Earth will deny any knowledge of your actions. You and your crew would face court-martial upon return." Susan nodded. "I'll inform the crew. Volunteers only." After the call ended, Susan called her senior officers to the bridge. Lieutenant Jack Miller, her tactical officer, listened intently as she explained the situation. "So we're going against direct orders to help aliens we've barely met?" he asked when she finished. "Not officially," Susan replied. "Officially, we're having navigation problems during a training exercise." Jack grinned. "Navigation problems. Got it. This is serious, Lieutenant. If we're caught, we're on our own." "With respect, Commander," Jack said, "if someone needs help, and we can provide it, that's all I need to know." Within an hour, Susan had informed her crew of 120 about the unauthorized mission. She made it clear that anyone who wished to stay behind could transfer to another ship with no questions asked. Not one crew member left. As the U.S. Defender prepared to depart, Susan sent a brief message to Eltaria. Ambassador Zorak Tal. This is Commander Susan Harper of Earth. We received your message. Help is coming. The U.S. Defender emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Altarian system. What the crew saw through the main viewport made them fall silent. Two small planets in the outer system were already surrounded by Vordak scout ships. Flashes of light indicated bombing was underway. Scan for life signs on those planets, Commander Harper ordered. Lieutenant Jack Miller worked quickly at his station. Very few remaining, Commander. Most population centers are gone. Dr. Olivia Wright, the ship's xenobiologist, studied the scanner readings. The Vordak aren't just bombing. They're extracting resources while they attack. Incredibly efficient and incredibly cruel. How long until they reach the Altarian homeworld? Susan asked. Based on their current speed, about 3 weeks, Jack answered. Susan nodded grimly. Set course for the homeworld. Stealth protocols. We don't want to alert the Vordak to our presence yet. The Defender slipped past the occupied planets and headed deeper into the system. As they approached the Altarian homeworld, they received a transmission. Unidentified vessel. This is Altarian Defense Control. Identify yourself immediately. Susan straightened in her chair. This is Commander Susan Harper of the Earth vessel U.S. Defender. We received your ambassador's distress call. There was a long pause before the response came. Earth vessel, please hold your position for escort. Two small Altarian ships approached and guided the Defender to a docking bay, hidden within a mountain range. As the airlock doors opened, Susan led a small team to meet their hosts. Jack stood ready at her side, his hand near his weapon. 3 Altarians waited for them. Their skin was pale blue, and they had 4 fingers on each hand. The one in the center stepped forward. Commander Harper, I am Ambassador Zorak Tal. I did not expect you to actually come. Susan extended her hand in the human greeting gesture she had shown Zora months ago. We don't ignore calls for help. Ambassador. Zara seemed overwhelmed for a moment, then composed herself. Please follow me. Our defense minister wishes to speak with you immediately. They were led through corridors filled with Altarians preparing for war. Many stopped to stare at the humans with a mixture of curiosity and hope. In a large command center, Defense Minister Tellen studied holographic maps of the system. He barely looked up when they entered. So the humans have arrived, he said flatly. 1 ship against the Vordak Armada. We're here to help in any way we can, Susan replied. Tellen finally looked at them. And how exactly can one small ship from a primitive species help against an enemy that the Galactic Coalition itself refused to engage? Lieutenant Jack Miller stepped forward. Sometimes being primitive has its advantages. The Vordak and the Coalition both rely on advanced technology and established tactics. We bring something different. And what is that? Tellen asked skeptically. Unpredictability, Jack said with a slight smile. I was a Marine before joining the Space Fleet. I've studied warfare throughout human history. Sometimes the technologically superior force loses because they can't adapt to unexpected strategies. Dr. Wright joined the conversation. I'd like to study the Vordak technology from the scout ships you've encountered. Every species has weaknesses. We just need to find theirs. Zara watched the exchange with growing hope. Minister, the humans think differently than we do, or even the Coalition. Perhaps that's exactly what we need right now. Tellen considered this for a long moment. We have nothing to lose. The outer colonies are already lost. The Coalition has abandoned us. He nodded toward a large building visible through the window. That facility contains our remaining defense forces and volunteers with minimal training. Jack looked at Susan, who nodded her approval. I can help train your volunteers, Jack offered. We may not have much time, but we can make it count. For the first time, a hint of hope appeared in Tellen's eyes. Very well. Ambassador Catal will coordinate with you. He turned back to his maps. Prove me wrong about humans, Commander. Please. As they left the command center, Altarians lined the corridors, watching the humans pass. Word had spread quickly about their arrival. One small Eltarian child stepped forward and offered a native flower to Susan. She accepted it with a smile. "No one else came," the child said simply. Zora translated the child's next words. "But the humans did." Over the next few days, the U.S. Defender became the center of activity for Altaria's defense preparations. Lieutenant Jack Miller worked from sunrise to sunset training Altarian volunteers. Though they were not natural fighters, the Altarians learned quickly and showed remarkable determination. "Keep your positions tight," Jack called out as a group practiced formation movements. "Remember, you're protecting each other, not just yourselves." Meanwhile, Chief Engineer Alice Brown worked with Altarian scientists to improve their planetary defense systems. The Altarians had impressive technology, but it had been designed for research and peaceful purposes, not war. "If we reroute the power from these stations," Alice explained, pointing to a map, "we can strengthen the shields over your major cities by 30%. In another section of the facility, Dr. Olivia Wright made progress studying the Vordak technology from captured scout ships. "Their neural interfaces are their weakness," she told Commander Harper during an evening briefing. "The Vordak ships respond to direct brainwave commands from their pilots. If we can generate the right frequency interference, we might disrupt their control systems." As the 7th day of preparation ended, Commander Harper received an unexpected message. Her communications officer looked up from his station with wide eyes. "Commander, we're receiving transmissions from 5 Earth ships approaching the system." Susan straightened in surprise. "Earth ships? Are you certain?" "Yes, ma'am. It's Captain Daniel Ross of the U.S. Intrepid leading them." Minutes later, Susan watched as 5 human ships entered orbit around Altaria. When Captain Ross's face appeared on the screen, he looked both determined and slightly embarrassed. "Commander Harper," he said with a small smile. "Looks like we all had the same navigation error." Susan couldn't help but smile back. "That's quite a coincidence, Captain Ross. Admiral Carter mentioned you might need some assistance with your training exercises," Ross explained. "We've brought soldiers, engineers, medical staff, and supplies." Soon, the command center was filled with human captains and Altarian officials. The mood had shifted dramatically from despair to cautious hope. "This changes everything," Defense Minister Tellon said, looking at the new arrivals. "With 6 human ships, we might actually stand a chance." As the meeting continued, a new alert sounded. An Altarian officer rushed into the room. "Minister, we've detected coalition vessels entering our system." The room fell silent. A large coalition ship soon hailed them, and the stern face of Exorthal, a senior coalition representative, appeared on the main screen. "Minister Tellon," Exorthal said coldly, "we have detected unauthorized Earth vessels in your system. This violates multiple coalition protocols." Tellon stood tall. "The Earth vessels are here at our invitation, Representative Exorthal." "The coalition has made its position clear," Exorthal replied. "The Vordak threat cannot be engaged directly. Earth has no authority to intervene in this matter." Captain Ross stepped forward. "With respect, Representative, Earth ships are conducting independent operations at the request of the Altarian government." "Captain," Exorthal's voice hardened, "return your ships to Earth immediately. Failure to comply will result in severe sanctions against your planet and possible expulsion from coalition territory." Before Ross could respond, Susan moved beside him. "Representative Exorthal, as the ranking officer who first arrived, I take full responsibility for our presence here." She looked around at the other human captains, who all nodded in agreement. "We respectfully decline to withdraw," Susan continued. "The Altarians need help, and we're going to provide it." Exorthal's face showed shock, then anger. "You will regret this decision, Commander Harper. The Coalition will not support you when the Vordak fleet arrives." The transmission ended abruptly. The room remained quiet until Captain Ross broke the silence. "Well, I guess we're officially in trouble now," he said. Susan turned to the Altarian minister. I apologize for any additional problems this may cause your people." To her surprise, Talon reached out and grasped her hand in the human gesture she had taught them. "Do not apologize, Commander. For the first time since we detected the Vordak, my people have real hope." Outside the command center, news of the human ships and their defiance of the coalition spread quickly through the Eltarian population. That night, thousands of Eltarians placed lights in their windows, a silent thank you to the humans who came when no one else would. 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. The Vordak main fleet would arrive in just 3 days. Commander Susan Harper called all human captains and Eltarian leaders to a final strategy meeting. The command center was crowded as Susan stood before a large holographic display showing the Eltarian system. "The Vordak fleet consists of 117 ships," she began. "We have 6 human vessels and 24 Eltarian ships that have been modified for combat." The numbers were not encouraging. Captain Ross folded his arms across his chest. "Those aren't good odds, Commander. Which is why we won't fight them in a traditional battle," Susan replied. She gestured to Lieutenant Jack Miller, who stepped forward. "The Vordak expect us to defend Eltaria directly," Jack explained. "Instead, we'll split our forces into small attack groups. Hit and run tactics." He pointed to various points on the display. Dr. Wright has identified weak points in Vordak ship design. Their engines, communication arrays, and weapon systems all have vulnerabilities. Dr. Wright joined them at the display. Their neural control systems can be disrupted by specific electromagnetic frequencies. We've modified torpedoes to emit these frequencies when they detonate. Defense Minister Tellen looked skeptical. The Vordak have conquered 12 systems. No one has ever defeated them in battle. No one has ever tried these tactics against them, Susan countered. The coalition always uses direct force. We're doing something different. Captain Ross nodded. Humans have a long history of asymmetric warfare. Sometimes, the smaller force wins by being smarter, not stronger. The meeting continued as they assigned ships to attack groups and finalized the battle plan. As people began to leave, Zora approached Susan. "My people are scared," she admitted. "Many don't believe we can win." Susan placed a hand on her shoulder. "Fear is normal before a battle. But sometimes you have to fight even when you're afraid." The next 3 days passed too quickly. Soon, long-range sensors detected the Vordak fleet entering the system. The moment had arrived. Susan stood on the bridge of the U.S. Defender, watching as her crew prepared for battle. Lieutenant Miller manned the tactical station, his face calm despite the danger ahead. "All weapons systems ready, Commander," he reported. "Attack groups are in position." Susan took a deep breath. "Open a channel to all ships." When the channel opened, she spoke clearly and firmly. "This is Commander Harper. The Vordak expect us to be easy targets. They expect us to follow conventional tactics. Today, we prove them wrong. We fight not just for Eltaria, but for every world the Vordak have threatened. Stay with your groups. Hit your targets. Watch each other's backs." She paused for a moment. Earth has never fought an interstellar battle before. Let's make this first one count. Harper out. As the Vordak fleet approached Eltaria, they formed a standard attack formation. Their massive ships moved with mechanical precision toward the planet. They expected the defenders to form a protective line. Instead, the human and Eltarian ships scattered in different directions. Aboard the lead Vordak vessel, Commander Krall watched in confusion as the defenders split into small groups. "What are they doing?" he demanded of his tactical officer. Before the officer could respond, 3 small Eltarian ships, led by Captain Ross's U.S. Intrepid, streaked past the Vordak formation. They fired precisely at the engine sections of 2 Vordak cruisers, then accelerated away before the larger ships could respond. On the other side of the formation, Susan's Defender and 2 more Eltarian vessels targeted the communication arrays of 3 Vordak ships, disrupting their ability to coordinate attacks. Throughout the Vordak fleet, similar strikes occurred simultaneously. The human attack pattern made no sense to the Vordak, who had always faced enemies that tried to match their strength directly. "Pursuit course," Krell ordered, but as his ships turned to chase one group, another would attack from a different direction. From her position, Susan watched the battle unfold. The plan was working. The Vordak ships were breaking formation, chasing smaller targets and exposing their vulnerabilities. "Continue attack pattern," she ordered. "Don't let them regroup." For the first time in their history of conquest, the Vordak fleet was in chaos. The initial success of the human battle plan did not last long. The Vordak were quick learners. After 12 hours of fighting, they adapted to the hit-and-run tactics. Their ships began to move in tighter formations with overlapping defense fields. On the bridge of the U.S. Defender, Susan Harper received the grim news. "Commander, we've lost the U.S. Courage and U.S. Horizon." Communications Officer Sam Bennett reported, his voice shaking slightly. "Captain Ross says the Intrepid is heavily damaged, but still fighting." Susan closed her eyes for a moment. 2 human ships destroyed. Hundreds of lives lost. "The Altarian defense grid is failing," Lieutenant Miller added. 3 more sectors have been hit. The Vordak are pushing toward the capital city. Susan had known this might happen. The Vordak fleet was too large to defeat with just their small force. But they had to try something else. "Get me Chief Engineer Brown," she ordered. Minutes later, Alice Brown's face appeared on the screen. She was in the main Altarian science facility, working with their engineers. "Please tell me you have good news." "Alice," Susan said. "Maybe, Commander," Alice replied. Her face was smudged with dirt and her eyes showed exhaustion. "We've been studying the Altarian atmospheric processors. They're designed to maintain ideal air conditions for the planet." "How does that help us against the Vordak?" "The processors can be modified to generate a massive electromagnetic pulse," Alice explained. "Based on Dr. Wright's research on Vordak neural interfaces, we might be able to disrupt every Vordak ship in orbit at once." Hope flickered in Susan's chest. "What's the catch?" Alice hesitated. "The pulse would need to be triggered from inside the Vordak flagship. Someone would have to plant the device manually near their central power core." The bridge fell silent. Everyone understood what that meant. A suicide mission. "How long to build this device?" Susan asked. 4 hours, maybe 5. "Do it," Susan ordered. "I'll find volunteers for the mission." When the channel closed, Lieutenant Miller spoke up immediately. "I'll go, Commander." Susan looked at him. Jack was her best tactical officer and a friend. "Jack, you don't have to." "With respect, Commander, I studied the Vordak ship layouts more than anyone else. I know how to move through their vessels undetected." Before Susan could respond, a new transmission came through. It was Zora K'tal. "Commander Harper, our orbital sensors show the Vordak flagship moving into position above our capital. They're preparing for a final assault." "We're working on a plan, Ambassador," Susan replied. "But we need someone who knows Vordak ship layouts." Zora's expression changed. "I studied their ship designs when we first detected them. I can help." "This is a combat mission, Ambassador. Extremely dangerous." "My world is dying, Commander," Zora said simply. "Let me help save it." 5 hours later, Lieutenant Miller and Zora prepared to board a small Altarian shuttle. The device Engineer Brown had created was secured in a special container. It looked surprisingly small for something that might save an entire planet. Susan stood with them in the launch bay. "Once you plant the device, you'll have 10 minutes to get clear before it activates." Jack nodded, though they all knew 10 minutes might not be enough time to escape the massive Vordak flagship. "The Defender and remaining ships will create a diversion," Susan continued. "We'll draw their fire away from your approach vector." She clasped Jack's arm in a warrior's grip. "Come back, Lieutenant. That's an order." Jack gave a small smile. "Yes, Mom." Susan turned to Zora, who looked both terrified and determined. "Are you sure about this, Ambassador?" My people have always been diplomats, not warriors, Zara replied. But sometimes words are not enough. You humans taught us that. As they boarded the shuttle, Chief Engineer Brown rushed in with a last-minute addition. Vordak armor, she explained, handing them 2 sets. Salvaged from a disabled scout ship, it might help you blend in. Jack examined the alien armor. Let's hope the Vordak don't look too closely. The shuttle bay doors opened to reveal the battle raging in orbit around Alteria. The small craft slipped away from the Defender and headed toward the massive Vordak flagship, while behind them, the remaining human and Alterian ships launched a desperate attack to create the diversion. Good luck, Susan whispered as she watched them go. The small shuttle approached the massive Vordak flagship from below. Lieutenant Jack Miller guided the craft carefully, using the battle as cover. Explosions lit up space around them as the human ships created their diversion. There, Jack pointed to a small opening on the underside of the Vordak ship. Service entrance for repair drones. Big enough for our shuttle. Zara looked nervous in her stolen Vordak armor. How will we get past security? We won't know until we're inside, Jack admitted, but the diversion should keep most of their crew busy. The shuttle slipped through the opening and landed in a small maintenance bay. Jack powered down the engines and checked the device one last time. Remember, once we activate it, we have 10 minutes to get clear. They put on their Vordak helmets and stepped out into the flagship. The corridors were dimly lit with a reddish glow. Strange symbols marked the walls. This way, Zara whispered, pointing left. The power core should be 3 levels down. They moved quickly, passing several Vordak soldiers who barely glanced at them. The armor was working. When they reached a transport tube, Jack checked his hand-drawn map. We take this down to level 5, then head east toward the core. The transport tube dropped them deep into the ship. As they stepped out, an alarm suddenly blared through the corridors. Red lights flashed overhead. Did they detect us? Zara asked, panic in her voice. A group of Vordak soldiers ran past them, ignoring the pair completely. No, Jack realized. It's the battle. Something must have happened. They continued toward the core, moving faster now. The ship shuddered as something hit it hard from outside. The Defender must be targeting the flagship, Jack said with pride. Finally, they'd reached a massive door marked with warning symbols. Beyond it lay the power core. How do we get through? Zara asked. Jack pulled out a small device Dr. Wright had given him. Universal access tool. At least, that's what the doctor called it. He placed it against the door's control panel. Seconds later, the doors slid open. Inside was a chamber larger than they expected. In the center floated a pulsing orb of energy, the Vordak power core. A walkway extended from the door to the core, with a control panel at its end. We need to place the device directly beside the core, Jack said, stepping onto the walkway. Suddenly, a harsh voice called out from behind them. Intruders. They turned to see a Vordak security chief with several guards. Their disguises hadn't fooled everyone. Run, Jack shouted, pushing Zara forward. They sprinted along the walkway as energy blasts hit around them. Jack fired back with his weapon, forcing the Vordak to take cover. When they reached the control panel, Jack quickly worked to place the device, while Zora provided cover fire. Hurry, she urged as more Vordak poured into the chamber. Almost. Jack connected the final wire, and the device hummed to life. Done. 10 minutes starting now. As they turned to escape, a blast hit Jack in the leg. He fell hard onto the walkway. Jack. Zara rushed to help him up. You need to go, he said through gritted teeth. I'll hold them off. I'm not leaving you, Zara insisted, helping him stand. Another blast hit nearby, showering them with sparks. Jack knew they wouldn't both make it out. He made a decision. Zara, your people need you. You have to survive to tell them what happened here. Before she could argue, he pushed her toward the exit and turned to face the approaching Vordak. He fired repeatedly, creating a barrier of energy blasts. "Go," he shouted one last time. Tears in her eyes, Zara ran. Jack continued firing, keeping the Vordak at bay. The countdown on the device showed 8 minutes remaining. In orbit above, Commander Susan Harper watched the battle unfold from the Defender's bridge. The ship shook as it took another hit. "Shields at 20%, an officer reported. "Hold position," Susan ordered. "Keep their attention on us." Suddenly, a small shuttle burst from the underside of the Vordak flagship. "Commander, we're receiving a transmission from the shuttle." Zara's voice came through, broken by static. "Commander Harper, device planted. Lieutenant Miller, stayed behind." Susan closed her eyes briefly. "Understood, Ambassador. All ships, prepare for electromagnetic pulse. 8 minutes to impact." Across the battlefield, the remaining human and Eltarian ships began to pull back, preparing for what would come next. Inside the Vordak flagship, Jack Miller fought on alone, buying time for his friends to escape. The final minutes of the countdown felt like years. Commander Susan Harper ordered all ships to maximum safe distance from the Vordak flagship. Zara's shuttle docked with the Defender, and the Ambassador rushed to the bridge. 3 minutes remaining, Officer Bennett announced. "Any chance of extracting Lieutenant Miller?" Susan asked, though she already knew the answer. "Negative, Commander," came the response. "The flagship is now on full alert." Zara stood beside Susan, her hands trembling. "He saved my life. He saved all of us." Inside the Vordak flagship, Jack Miller had taken cover behind the power core control panel. His leg wound made it impossible to run, but he could still fight. The Vordak security forces surrounded his position, led by Security Chief Draz. "Surrender, human," Draz called out. "Tell us what device you planted, and your death will be quick." Jack checked the countdown. 2 minutes left. He just needed to keep them distracted a little longer. "Why don't you come find out?" he shouted back, firing another burst from his weapon. On the Defender's bridge, the tension was unbearable. 1 minute remaining, Bennett reported. Suddenly, alarms blared. "Commander, 3 Coalition warships just entered the system." Susan stared at the screen in disbelief as the massive Coalition vessels approached. A transmission came through, and the face of Coalition High Chancellor Vex Nor appeared. "Commander Harper," he said coldly, "the Coalition has reconsidered the Eltarian situation. We are here to take control of this conflict." "You're too late," Susan replied. "In less than a minute, the Vordak fleet will be disabled." The Chancellor's expression changed to alarm. "What have you done?" The countdown reached 0. For a brief moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then, a wave of blue energy pulsed outward from the Vordak flagship. It spread rapidly, washing over every Vordak ship in orbit. As the pulse hit each vessel, their lights flickered and died. The mighty Vordak fleet, terror of a dozen star systems, drifted powerless in space. "All Vordak neural control systems are offline," reported Lieutenant Miller's replacement at Tactical. "Their weapons, engines, life support, everything is shutting down." A cheer erupted on the bridge. The human plan had worked. "What about the flagship?" Susan asked, thinking of Jack. "Main power is offline, but emergency systems are functioning. Life signs are still detectable." Susan made a quick decision. "Prepare a rescue team. I want Lieutenant Miller back." An hour later, the rescue team reported success. They had found Jack Miller unconscious but alive near the power core. The Vordak, unable to operate their weapons without the neural interfaces, had been unable to stop the rescue. In the Defender's medical bay, Jack opened his eyes to see Susan and Zara standing over him. "Did it work?" he asked weakly. Susan smiled. "It worked perfectly. The Vordak fleet is disabled." "And the Coalition showed up after the danger passed," Zara added with a touch of bitterness. 3 days later, a formal ceremony was held in the Eltarian capital city. Coalition High Chancellor Vex Nor stood before a crowd of Eltarians and humans, looking distinctly uncomfortable. The Coalition recognizes the valor of Earth's forces, he said stiffly. In light of recent events, we extend an invitation for humanity to join the Galactic Coalition as full members. Commander Harper, still in her slightly damaged uniform, stepped forward. The people of Earth appreciate the invitation, she said diplomatically. However, we would like to propose an alternative. She gestured to where Jack sat in a hover chair, his legs still healing, with Zara beside him. Today, representatives from Earth, Alteria, and 6 other worlds that the Coalition abandoned have signed a new treaty. We call it the Alliance of Free Worlds. Any civilization that seeks protection or wishes to join will be welcomed. Chancellor Vexnor's face flushed with anger, but he said nothing as several Coalition members in the audience moved to stand with the humans. That evening, as the stars appeared over Alteria, Jack and Zara stood on a balcony overlooking the city. Lights shone everywhere, no longer in fear, but in celebration. What happens now? Zara asked. Jack smiled. Now we rebuild. Together. In orbit above, human ships from Earth worked alongside Alterian vessels to repair the damage from the battle. A new chapter had begun in the galaxy, one where humans showed that sometimes the most important strength wasn't advanced technology or political power. It was the will to help when no one else would.